Okay, the math professor is on the air once more. Come on in, Tylen. And share the screen. Okay, so we're going to talk more about network node analysis. And tomorrow I will post a video that will finish this chapter if we haven't finished it, and work through some problems for you to make it absolutely clear for anyone who hasn't already found it to be absolutely clear how you do a network node analysis. Okay, I was going to post it today for you to look at it tomorrow, but then I thought, no, that's just going to confuse everyone. So, all right. When we were talking before, we were talking about the automated warehouse and how do we build that network. Okay, so there we have these 8 activities, A through H, going all the way from defining the requirements to integrating systems and what are the preceding activities, right? We have to be able to define the preceding activities for this kind of network node analysis. All right, so here we have the actual network where it's going to go from define requirements through assigning the team and designing the hardware, which can be done at the same time, and then coding the software, building and testing the hardware, developing the patent requests, which can also, all 3 be done in parallel, through testing the software and integrating all of those systems together. All right, when we do that, we do what we call the forward pass. The forward pass tells us what are the earliest times for all activities. So how soon can the activity start? The early start. How soon can the activity finish? Early finish. And how soon can the project finish? The expected finish time. All right. Then, after we've done the forward pass, we do the backward pass. How late can the activity start? So we calculate the late start. How late can the activity finish? Which activities represent the critical path? And how long can the activity be delayed? Which we call the slack or the float. All right, so these 8 activities each have an activity time associated with them. Obviously, these times are estimated Because at this point, the project hasn't been done, it's just being contemplated. Or possibly contemplated. So we look and we have our activity on node network. Now each of these blocks, you'll notice has 8 sub-blocks within it. Okay, so down here you have the legend. In the middle top block is the number or letter that designates the block, right? So we've got A, we've got B, we've got C, D, E, F, G, and finally H. Then we also have a block which takes up 2 of the spaces where we put our description of what is the activity. All right, so A is define the requirements, B is assign the team, C is design the hardware, D is code the software, E is build and test the hardware, F is develop a patent request, G is test the software, and H is integrate those systems together. All right, and so we also have the duration or length of time that it's going to last. So here it's 10, 5, 25, 20, 50, 15, 35, 15. Now, these open blocks represent the early start, early finish, late start, and slack. Okay, and all of that is summarized in this little block down here. Now this seems very complicated, but it turns out to be quite simple. All right, so here we have the forward pass. We always start with 0 on our very first activity. Okay, so the early start time is 0 for that activity. We take that 0, we add our duration of 10 to get 10. Right? That 10 is then carried to B and C as their early start times. Okay, so for B, it's 10 plus 5 gives us 15 for our early finish time. For C, design hardware, it's 10 plus 25 is 35 for our early finish time. Right? And that just carries on through D here is an early start of 15 plus 20 is 35, which means that G is takes that 35 as its early start time. You add 35, you get 70. For E here, it's starting with 35, you add 50 for 85. For F, you start with 35 as the early start time, you add 15 for 50. All right, so we have a merge activity in integrate systems. And how do we decide which of our times, right? Because it's got 3 different times, 70, 85, and 50 coming into it. Well, it's got to be the latest time has got to be the early start, because all 3 of those activities have to be done before it can get started. All right, so it takes 85 and its duration of 15 then becomes 100. All right, easy peasy, lemon squeezy. Have I not used that in this class before?
No.
All right, so our forward pass duration, or forward pass times, we're taking the activity times, we are taking the early start time from each activity, adding the duration for the early finish. Then that early finish goes to the next activity where it's the early start, unless it's a merge activity. And if that's the case, the largest early finish number is the one that we use. All right. We have our forward pass times, and I wish they had left those up here, but I guess they thought that would be too confusing. Michelle, was that a question?
No.
Oh, too bad. Then we're going to do our backward pass. All right, so from the forward pass, we started at the low end and we went to the high end. In this case, we're going to go the other way. Our early finish time for the project comes down to be our late finish time for the project on the last activity. Okay, so you well remember, I'm sure, that that was 100, so now our late finish time is 100. We subtract the duration to get our late finished, our late start time, excuse me. Okay, now that time propagates backwards to all of these activities that merge into our H activity, right? So test software, we put 85 as its late finish time. Build and test software gets 85 as its late finish, and develop patent request gets 85. Then we take the duration of each activity and we subtract that from the late finish time to get the late start time. Okay, so here 85 minus 35 is 50. 85 minus 50 is 35. Who would have thought it? 85 minus 15 is 70. And once again, we have here E and F both go back to the split activity of C. And so it is a choice of what goes for late finish. And the smallest time, in this case, goes for the late finish time, right? So in this case, it's 35, right? We have 35 here, 70 here. Oh, come back here. All right, so when it becomes 35, we subtract 25 for our duration, we get 10. Up here, We have 50 as the late start time. That becomes the late finish time for code software, minus 20 is 30. That 30 carries over as the late finish time for assigned team, minus 5. Is our late start time for B, right? So then we have our late start time of 25 and a late start time of 10. And so the smaller one, 10, becomes our late start time for activity A. Well, activity A is a duration of 10, so that means that the latest we can start is at 0 time, which you remember is also the earliest we can start. Okay, so there you go, the huge excitement. All right, so that is our backward pass. All right, so for the backward pass, we're subtracting our activity times on each path, starting with the project end activity, where the late finish minus the duration equals the late start. If the next succeeding activity is a burst activity, then in that case we use the smallest late start number of all its successor activities. Okay, so when we do the forward pass, if we have a merge activity, we're choosing the largest early finish time. If we are doing the backward pass, when we get to the burst activity, we're using the smallest of the late start times. Okay, and here's a totally worthless point that they've waited until the last second to throw in. Just to show them. All right, so here you see they've already done the forward pass, the backward pass, right? We followed along, went through those. Then what we have to do is we have to calculate our slack times. So for example here, test software, our early start time is 35. Our late start time is 50. The difference between those is our slack time, right? So the earliest we could start testing the software is time period 35. But the latest time we could start and still finish on time is 50, right? So we got 15 time periods slack in there if we needed. So we calculate slack in that manner for all of these, right? Here the slack is 15, here it's 15, here it's 35. But you'll notice we have a path here where the slack is 0 for every activity. That's what we call the critical path. That is the path we have to manage very carefully to make sure that it stays on time, or the project will be delayed if any activity on it goes into overtime. All right, so for doing it this way, there will always be a critical path that has to be identified. All right, I know this is a little bit confusing. In fact, one of the reasons, I had started filming the extra class earlier today. I screwed up my calculations, and I was kind of like, oh, the hell with this. I'm going home and having a nap before class. It's very useful to live 5 minutes away. Right, so when you're doing it the first time, actually, I will put together the presentation and post it on Moodle tomorrow, and I'm going to go through a bunch of examples, right? So you'll be hearing about forward passes and backward passes till you're sick of the whole thing. All right. We want to know definitely how much slack we have in the project, right? Because when we look at this, we say, assigning the team, we've got slack, coding the software, testing the software, we got slack in all of those, developing the patent request. Well, if we have a small team where we can only devote a few people to each critical work package, then that lets us, gives us some flexibility as far as we know this is the critical path, so we're going to make sure that we've got people working on that all the time. But we may be able to start some activities a little bit later when we can free up some people from the critical path work packages. All right, so our slack is the amount of time we can delay an activity without delaying the project. So they just say the same thing here 3 times. Right, so we calculate that as the difference between our late start and our early start. They say as between our late finish and early finish. Actually, yeah, mathematically that works out. Okay, I never calculated it that way. It didn't make sense to me at first. And still make the schedule that we have set up. All right, so our free slack or the float time gives us an amount of time we can delay our parallel activities because we have one particularly time-consuming part of the project or something like that. So that could be that we started at the same time as the parallel activity, and then we just have slack at the end, or that could be we delay starting it and then go up to the late finish, or any combination of that. Start a little late, finish a little early. So obviously, this lets us schedule our resources more flexibly, right? If 2 parallel activities need to use the same resources or facilities to accomplish both, then the one with slack, we can kind of say, okay, well, look, activity B here needs to use the laboratory for a week right up front. But we've got 10 days slack on activity C. We're going to wait, let them use the laboratory first, and then we'll start activity C when we've got the when we've got B well underway. So you can't have slack at the very beginning activity, right? It has to start on time and end on time for everything else to work. We also can't have slack in the end activity. It has to start on time and end on time, right? But in between, we can have activities with slack. Now, if you calculate this and every activity has some slack, you've made a mistake. There has to be that one line of activities that has zero slack that defines the critical path. Critical path theory was actually, I think I said this before, figured out by NASA originally. They said if we're going to put up a spacecraft in the shortest possible time, there's obviously one set of activities that are critical to making this happen on time. Okay, I can see this little bit of historical minutia is just making you all excited. All right, so our critical path, that's our network paths that have the least slack. It's possible that you could have a critical path that ends up branching and coming back together at some point. Typically, it's the longest path through our activity network. And it defines the shortest time in which the project can be completed. Obviously, it impacts our completion time, right? If it's the shortest pathway, that means that we have to stay on that and manage that like nobody's business to make our completion time come out right. So, as a consequence, we usually have our best people working that part. We will, this is where we pay extra extension? No. That's where we pay extra attention. Oh, well, I didn't actually mean to do it in caps. Okay, I do not know who proofreads these things, but my dog. All right. We're going to pay extra attention to any activity on the critical path as far as the risks, right? Is there a risk that critical resources will be missing? Is there a risk that critical people will be missing? It's what we're going to look at when somebody comes to us and asks for help in the form of our people, our equipment, our facilities, whatever, right? If it doesn't affect the critical path, then we can be magnanimous, we can be really generous and say, oh, certainly, Judith, here, use these people. And it's where we always keep track. They say it's where you look when you don't have time to monitor all activities. Well, bloody hell, could you have put it in a more boring way, I ask.
So is it kind of like the main focal point in the project?
It's gotta be.
Okay.
It's absolutely gotta be. Okay, well, in fact, all right, so look, right through here, we have no slack. And assuming we have done a good job of estimating times, that means we have to be able to define requirements within our 10 time periods. We have to be able to design the hardware within our 25 time periods. We have to be able to build and test that hardware within our 50 time periods. And we have to be able to integrate the system within those 15 time periods, right? This other stuff, we could start 15 time periods late. If that's weeks, if that's, days, we could start 2 weeks late on this and still be in good shape, right? But any place we have 0 for the slack, we have got to make sure that it is happening on time. Now, I have worked on projects where I have had a hell of a job persuading people, no, this is the critical path, this has to be done. And they're like, yeah, but I'd really much rather be over here playing with paper dolls, or whatever their weak excuse is. So, and that's one of the things we have to realize. If you're the manager, you've got to manage. And sometimes managing means you've got to tell people, no, you can't do that. Right now, we have got to do this, or the project won't be done on time, and we'll all look like a bunch of idiots. Now, people that work projects all the time, it's easier for them to understand this. If people work projects, every once in a blue moon they work a project, they may not get this simple idea that the critical path, we always have to pay attention to the critical path. All right, network sensitivity. Now here's the problem with paying attention to the critical path. It is very likely that the critical path is going to end up changing because of conditions that you may have anticipated or you may not have anticipated. Right? It turns out that something that you thought was going to be very hard and is on the critical path turns out to be super easy, and all of a sudden, boom, you got two extra weeks on the critical path. Well, that doesn't mean you got 2 extra weeks, really. It means something else is now the critical path, and you've got to go back and recalculate. I mean, maybe the critical path will be the same thing, and our project is just now 2 weeks shorter. But it's also possible that our network is going to be much more, we're going to have to go back and recalculate and make sure, right? Because if it turns out on the critical path, we've freed up 2 weeks, but there's another path that's only 3 days shorter, well, that path is now the critical path. So we only have one critical path at a time. And if we have a lot of slack, we think of those activities as being insensitive. And you know how it is, people come and they say, oh, your work package is insensitive to me. Okay, I'm sorry, that was a stupid joke. All right, so something that we have to think about all the time is ways that we can have screwed up our network. One is a network logic error. Unlike a flow chart where you can have looping, we don't allow looping in network node analysis, right? So if you've got a loop, you've got a problem. The activity numbering, we try and have it in a somewhat systematic order so that we don't have activity E is not followed by activity B, right? We try and have it so it starts with A, goes through B, C, D, E, F, G, et cetera, et cetera. We can use computers to develop our networks and our Gantt charts now pretty easily. In fact, that's how I do it. I don't even sit down with paper to figure it out on paper before I start doing it in the computer anymore. And that's actually something that you might want to teach yourself. It's a bit of a jump to, because in school, what are we taught? We're taught to use pencil and paper and to start working things out that way. And then later they came along with computers. They said, all right, now add this part in. So teaching yourself to be able to go ahead and jump from having to do it on paper to then do it in the computer can be a big one, but if you learn to do that, it will really save you so much time. I had somebody working for me once, a junior engineer, and I was wandering around doing my management by walking about kind of thing. And I came up and I'm asking, what are you doing? Because they had their notes from the shop floor, and what they were doing was they were writing them on another pad. And that person said, well, I'm making a neater set of my notes. And I said, okay, and then what do you do? And they said, well, then I put it in the computer. And I'm like, put it in the computer now! You're wasting my time! Okay, I tried to say it a little nicer than that, but I was somewhat impatient that they couldn't see how much time they were wasting by doing it that way. All right, being able to just put things into the computer. Look, sometimes pencil and paper has its uses, or pen and paper. I mean, personally, I rarely ever use a pencil because I'm left-handed and the lead gets all over my hand and so I started using a pen very early, in fact, I had a teacher in college that would grade my homework as a 0 because I did it in pen instead of pencil. Yeah, thanks a lot, Mr. Bashji, appreciate it. But some things don't lend themselves as much to necessarily doing that. Maybe now that we have tablets, it will more. For example, one of the things I do is in computer skills, I talk to the students about setting goals, right? And I tell them one of the best things to do, you sit out on the porch with the beverage of your choice, right? And just kind of think about what are some things you want to do, some things you want to create, some things you want to accomplish, right? And just write those down, right? And then later you can put them in the computer and do a whole exciting list of things, right? So it makes some sense to do a kind of pen and paper or pencil and paper thing there. Or, you know, you're at the restaurant, everybody starts talking shop, next thing you know, you're going, oh, wait, I have an idea, right? So you get out, you get a piece of paper and you're drawing them stuff on the back of an envelope and saying, look, this is how it would work, man. You know, so there are still places where pen and paper or pencil and paper are valuable, but the more we can think straight into the computer, the faster we're going to be at doing our work. And speed and efficiency are definitely something our employers are going to want. Okay, well, I feel like I've gone off on a long disquisition about that. What are the calendar dates, right? Are all weeks equal and all days equal? Oh, no. For example, if our project runs through Thanksgiving or Christmas, how many days are we going to lose to assorted holiday fooling around? We're going to lose a lot. For example, when I worked for A&M at the Army Depot, I always took the 2 weeks leading up to New Year's off, because everything was so slow, it would start driving me crazy. You know, you go down to talk to somebody, and it's like, oh, can I get such and such file? Oh yeah, I'll send it to you. When the fields are white with daisies, you'll have it. That is the kind of thing that has caused me untold thousands of dollars in dental damage from grinding my teeth. Right? So the calendar dates make a difference. It might be just a small thing, like this week we had Labor Day. All right, well that meant that 2 of my classes didn't meet on Monday, which is not too big a deal because I've already gone through, figured out what date every class meets, and that we're meeting our minimum 40 hours of contact time. In fact, actually this class, because we have 32 meetings, we're way over.
So we have some slack.
Very well put. Yeah, if it came down to it, and there was a problem somewhere in the course, my sister broke her arm over the weekend. I think I told you this in my email. And so Tuesday's class had to be put off because I had to haul her assets to the doctor. Right now, we could just blow that class off, although I would hate to deprive you of the joy of getting to listen to me. But that could have been done. Speaking of joy, the quiz for this week is posted in Moodle, right? You may have noticed all the quizzes tend to be very simple, but you only have 24 hours to do it, and that 24 hours started a few minutes before class started.
Oh,
Yeah.
come on, those slacks.
Yeah.
You got slack. You got hours and hours of slack. Because ordinarily I would give you 10 minutes to finish those quizzes in
Yeah.
class.
So it's due tomorrow,
Uh,
3 o'clock?
Well, I would recommend look at it and do it as quickly as possible. It should be something pretty simple. It's just based on what we've been doing in class. And if it's not simple, book. All right, so the calendar dates can screw us up, either in a pretty big way or a little way. Some things end up being significant. For example, when is Veterans Day?
Right on Wednesday this year.
Exactly, it's on Wednesday. So that means some people may take either Monday, Tuesday, or Thursday, Friday off, right? And Veterans Day isn't a holiday where we say, oh, okay, well, it falls on a Wednesday, so we move it to Monday, like a lot of holidays like Memorial Day, Labor Day, right? They're just only done on, right? But things like Code Talkers Day, that's August 14th, no matter what. Veterans Day, Christmas, obviously, New Year's, etc. All right, we may have multiple starts for multiple projects, right? And it's kind of like, even if you're not a fan, have you ever watched a NASCAR race or a Formula One race? Everybody starts at once, right? And so there's a big traffic jam there at the beginning while everyone sorts out who's going to be in the lead. And it can be like that if we've got a lot of projects going all at the same time. All right, so here is a network logic error. In this case, it's a loop. Right, you could also have a network logic error by, well, for example, the first example that I built for you guys that I'm going to film tomorrow, I didn't realize I had left out an arrow until I got to the end, and I'm like, wait a minute. Right, so when you build your network, be sure that you're putting it together correctly, that everything, you know, except for the beginning and end activities, everything has to have at least one arrow coming in and at least one arrow coming out.
Okay.
Here is just kind of a slightly different way of expressing our automated warehouse order picking system. But here they've associated days or calendar days with it, right? So you'll notice here on our defined requirements, the duration is 10 days, but it starts on January the 1st and ends on January the 14th. Okay, and that's because we've got to take into account weekends. It's a rare project where we're just all going to work all the time. And in fact, from a human factors point of view, human factors is the psychology of how we do tasks. Having everyone work every day all the time is a really bad idea. You get very tired on a deep level. Back in the day when I worked in the theater, a friend of mine was the technical director at the Alley Theater, which is a kind of semi-famous regional theater down in Houston, Texas. And so the production manager comes to him. He says, "What do you think? 7 days a week, 12 hours a day?" And my friend Joe says, "No, we're going to work 6 days a week, 10 hours a day." Because there comes a point when working more hours gets less work overall, and you don't want to be in that situation, obviously. All right, so you'll notice when we put the calendar times in there, it makes it a little bit more messy. For that matter, starting on January the 1st, I have my doubts about that idea. That's what I want, is to start with a bunch of people that are hungover, can barely drag themselves into work. Half of them get there almost at lunchtime.
Work 1 hour.
Yeah, so again, the consideration of what is the date and what is its significance is always one we need to be thinking about. All right, here they've taken that same idea. They've got the start and finish dates and the late start and finish dates, and they've gone ahead and made a Gantt chart. This looks very similar to the Microsoft project software that I'm familiar with. The Microsoft project software, boy, I have not seen that in a long time. I wonder if they still are selling that. The thing is, with Excel, I can make such great charts. I'm not worried about Project because Project was kind of a clunky software to use. If you had things change, it was not dynamic at all. A friend of mine worked for a while on how to make a better project scheduling software than Project. But he and his partner got into a big fight, and oh my God, you know, death, where's thy sting? All right. Sometimes we get in a situation where we create a great network node, a great network, and the only problem with it is that it's not going to work with the time schedule that we actually have. So we have to have different ways that we can shorten the duration. And we're going to talk about that a little bit now, and we'll talk about it a bit in a later chapter on things that can be done to shorten the duration of a project. One of them is laddering. In this case, we're going to say, you know what? We can break these activities into smaller segments and interweave them in a way that will let us shorten the project. Sometimes we're going to have lags, and that's where we delay starting another activity so that we can actually start it early still, but we know how much time has to go on the preceding activity to allow that to happen. All right, so here is an example of laddering, right? If we're going to lay a pipe, let's assume not the North Dakota access pipeline.
You had to go there.
Well, you know, we want to think in terms of the real world.
Okay.
That was a stupid idea. I'm totally on board with that. We do have to have pipelines at times. So let's assume this is a pipeline we have to have. This is going to be a pipeline to supply water to the Navajo Nation. Okay, so we've got a good cause to have a pipeline. Now, a lot of times what ends up happening is people want to dig the whole trench, and then they put in the whole pipe, and only then do they start covering it back up. Well, if it's a super long pipeline, you don't want to really do it that way. So here, they're going to lay a mile's worth of pipe. They dig 1/3 of a mile of trench, and then when that's done, they can keep digging the trench while they lay 1/3 of the mile of pipe. When that's done, they can dig the last part of the trench while they're laying 1/3 of a mile of pipe and refilling the 1/3 where we've already laid the pipe. Then that goes to, when that's done, we're laying another 1/3 of the pipe, the last 1/3, and refilling the second 1/3 of the trench. And then finally, we're refilling the last part of the trench, right? So that way, instead of everything being strung way out, we've condensed it to a smaller time frame. Now, that often means we have to use more resources in the way of equipment, people, and so on. But if you've ever worked construction jobs, you may understand that so many construction jobs are just hideously inefficient. All right. Ordinarily, we think of activities as we have to finish X activity before we can go to start Y activity. Sometimes, though, we're going to be able to start activity M and start activity N, which theoretically should come after it, but we're cheating a little bit. We're going to create some inefficiency when we have to do that, but sometimes we really need to save the time more than we need to save the money. Now, we might also have a situation, as in B here, where we start activity P, we wait 5 time periods, that's the lag 5 down here, and then we start activity Q, right? We've got enough of activity P started that they can get started on activity Q. All right, so here is kind of a different view of laying our water pipeline, right? They're going to dig a trench 1 mile long. They get started, they wait 3 time periods, and then they start laying the pipe, right? They've got part of the trench there. They can do that. And then after they start laying the pipe, they wait 3 time periods and they can start refilling, right? So that assumes that essentially we're going to have 3 crews, right? One crew is trenching, one crew is laying pipe, and then one crew is refilling. And we assume at the end, whoever we've got left over from trenching helps with refilling. When we think about new product development, the old approach was somebody would plan the product, they would then throw that over the wall, we call it, to the systems engineering guys who would look at it. They would throw it over the wall to the engineering, design, and development guys. They would throw it over the wall to the procurement guys, who would throw it over the wall to manufacturing and production. And then finally, they'd throw it over the wall to quality assurance, and we'd have a release of our new product, whatever it is. Then they came up with the idea of concurrent engineering, where product planning starts at the same time as systems engineering, starts at the same time as engineering, design, and development, et cetera, shortening the time. Now, we actually have a more concurrent engineering approach, right? And this is relevant even for those of you who are in a business major, because these days what they do is they get a design team that has people from all of these things on it, right? So the marketing guys are in there, the procurement guys, the product planning guys, the engineers, the manufacturing guys, quality assurance, everybody's in there at once. This is actually how the Japanese started beating up on Detroit so much, because Detroit was doing this process where they would design cars, they would design the next 10 years worth of cars. And really all they were doing was kind of changing the front and the back so that they would look a little different every year. the Japanese would get big teams together that would design a car in a short amount of time, put it into production, have it in production, sell it, and get it off the market before the Americans or Europeans could even finish a design. So more and more, we try and figure out how we can shorten the process to get things to the market sooner. Right? If we're doing a project, and that project is to design a new product, whatever it is, a toaster, blender, smartphone, and we find out our competitors are doing the same thing, getting out first is going to make a huge difference. Right? We come out with our new Norelco toaster before the XYZ company can come out with their new toaster. Both of them have really smart, modern design. Well, ours is out in time for Christmas and theirs is out in time for Easter. Who's going to sell more?
Christmas.
Did you just say our competitors? Well, of course,
So-
in the end, it's going to depend on other things.
So,
but
I
the-
mean, the way that it's designed, and the way you said that they're trying to go through it as quickly as possible, how good are the designs for like new cars? If they're trying to just get everything out there, like do they actually take times? Like you know how when they have these award-winning, this car is the safest ride or whatever. How, and they did like research and whatever on that car. Like, do they even do that kind of research, or do they just put it out there and cross their fingers and hope that it's safe per se?
They do their best to ensure that a car is safe. You don't want, you don't want to put out any product that becomes known as a fire hazard, or if you're in a crash in this car, you might as well just have your rosary beads in your hand.
So in that case,
Right, but the testing is ordinarily done by independent organizations. You have the Underwriters Laboratory that tests electrical equipment. They are independent. They don't get money from the people that make extension cords and electrical appliances and things. They test all of those and they just say, hey, this is the best one, this is the safest one, right?
Yeah.
Consumer Reports, they do tests that are independent of the manufacturers. They always test cars. And there are other nonprofit organizations like this that test these things and keep the manufacturers honest.
so what do they do when they do have a recall? Like, where does that fall in project management? Like, you make a new toaster, and all of a sudden or the competitor sells it, and they find out that you can only toast 4 toasts, and then it blows up or something. And then
Hopefully we do enough tests to find that out.
and then so they call for a recall. Like I've heard recalls on toys, on vehicles.
Sometimes you have something that wasn't anticipated, right? We design something and we have it made in China and it's a toy. It's brought over to America, we start selling it, and then we find out the Chinese were using lead paint. right? Well, lead paint is illegal in America, particularly for toys these days. So we're gonna have to suck that up and buy every one of those back, if that happens. But the usual is like car recalls, right? When I moved here, I had a 2002 Honda. They contacted me because it had the bad airbags, right? So all I had to do was I went to Honda, they changed those out, Bob's your uncle, we're done. Right? The problem is a lot of times people don't check if there are recalls for their cars. And some of them are very, very tiny, you know. This relay doesn't work quite right, right? But people never check if there's a recall. They never know, they own the car, they sell the car, it goes on. Rebecca, you had a question?
So they're coming out with this new, semi-vehicles, semi-trucks, and it's gonna be driving on its own. And it's gonna be here in New Mexico. I don't know if you've heard of that, but, so now talk about efficiencies. I mean, that's gonna be scary.
That does have some scary aspects. In fact, I've heard older people say, I'll never own a car that drives itself. Where some younger people that have more faith in technology, they're like, oh yeah, that would be great, man, I'll never have to parallel park again. It is kind of scary because so far what they're discovering is that most of the time those things work perfectly. The problem is there's this wee tiny sliver of time when that is not perfect operation. And that has been a problem. Some people have been killed either that were pedestrians or I mean, for example, I remember reading about a test. The car got confused because it was driving down the street and there was a lady chasing a chicken in the middle of the road. And so the car didn't know what to do. Right now, they're requiring that there be a human backup driver, right? And that backup driver just said, you know what, we put on the brakes now, we see what happens with this.
Yeah.
Right? But if the car had been all by itself, God only knows what would have happened. Look, automation more and more is going to be part of our lives, and that's been happening a long time. The word saboteur, that comes from the French. The workers wore wooden shoes, carved wooden shoes. Usually you see them illustrated as if only the Dutch wear those. And the early automated machines, they would shove their wooden shoes in, and the shoes are called sabots. So that's how saboteur came around, right? We've always been afraid of automation, but automation has traditionally produced more jobs in the end than it took. But here's the catch. We're getting to a part of time where we're going to have robot factories that have robot repairmen. That could be hard for our human beings to find a place that they fit in. So, a word to the wise is sufficient. Of course, here on the Navajo Nation, how many robot factories we're going to have? Hell of a question. All right, sometimes we do a finish-to-finish relationship, where here we're prototyping and we're doing the testing as we're going along with the prototype, right? So there's only a lag of 4 in a finish-to-finish relationship. Maybe it's testing being done and the system documentation is being built that whole time, which is actually very common, which is why a lot of times when you read the manual, you're like, this does not match up. The buttons they say to push, the order they say to do things does not match what I have to do here to make my device work. And sometimes you have a combination where you're actually starting, for example, here they're talking about coding software and debugging the software as if we can work on that kind of at the same time. All right, so here we have a network using lags. I want y'all to understand the ideas of laddering and lagging, but we'll talk about it a little bit later in the book, but for the most part, stick with the straightforward way of making networks. All right, so here we have an illustration of doing that. A hammock activity is one that we kind of slip in somewhere, like it's a hammock out in your backyard, and we span that over part of the project. So here we have a hammock activity. Activity G has been added in here, and it's going on from the time that B starts until F finishes, right? And there we go. We have our key terms. Do we have any questions? What do you say, Lyndon? Any questions? Well, damn it, Dan, ask a question every once in a while so we know you're alive. Okay, great. So, like I said, tomorrow I'll do kind of a practical session of showing you how I build networks, and so that shouldn't be a super big deal. Just watch the video, and then that'll help you with your homework, which is all about building networks and analyzing. Okay, last chance for questions. Going once, going twice. Okay, hey, have a good weekend, guys. And when the fields are white with daisies, call it Tuesday afternoon. We'll meet again.
It might be white with snow.
Thanks, London.